this is what we can do with precision feeding. So having two feed, one that is the high and like it to the highest level of lysine you need, and the lowest, and you can mix together and be better fit the nutrient requirements. So yeah, you can adjust a little bit better. So at the end, even we did a bump feeding. So in terms of energy, all the treatment was like the same and all of that. And we had, however, the bump feeding also, but we also adjust the concentration better than the conventional feeding, which is always a flat line. So
hello, everyone, and welcome to the Swine Canada podcast show today. I'm Dan Columbus, your host, and joining me today is Laetitia Cloutier, who is a project leader in feeding and nutrition at the Swine Development Center in Quebec, or more commonly known as CDBQ. How are you today, Laetitia?
I'm very good, and you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for joining us today. I'm excited to hear about the topic. Before we get into the topic that you've suggested for today's podcast, though, because some people might not be familiar with who you are and what you do, do you mind giving a little bit of background on yourself and some more information?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you so much for the invitation. It's really an honor to be here. So thank you. I come from Quebec City, so I don't come from agriculture sector, but I really had interest in agronomy. So I started to do my bachelor degrees at Laval University in agronomy. And in the first year, I had the chance to visit many type of farm, and I really have interest when I visit the farming barn with the little piglets and all of that. So I decided to start working there in a commercial farm during the summer. And after, I really loved the production, so I continued to work on that sector. And during one of our class, we received Dr. Candido Pamar come to explain his research and present his research on precision feeding. So I was very interested in this subject. So I contacted him, and I had the chance to work with him during one summer to work on the precision feeder. So this moment, I was working on the parameters to reduce the cross-contamination between the pigs when using the precision feeder. And this experience, this work really told me that I love to do research. So I decided to do my master degrees again with Dr. Candido Pamar on precision feeding. At that time, the subject was to validate the precision feeding model. And so I finished my master's in 2013. And at this point, I started beginning to work for the Swine Development Center, donc le Centre de Développement du Sport du Québec, here in Quebec. And till then, for 10 years now, I've been working more on precision feeding. So try to bring my expertise from the master degrees to precision feeding for sows mainly, or how to implement it now in our farm.
Yeah, great. It's interesting for me to see the number of people that come from a city background and make their way into swine. It seems to be a common feature. I don't know what it is about pigs that entices us from the city to get into research and go into that.
It's really interesting. It's like brand new. I think it's when you come from city and you don't know how it's working. When you discover this universe, it's like a lot of new information, and it's really a great production, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the topic that you've been working on and that you've suggested for today is really good, and I think it fits in with some of the previous guests that we've had with Candido Pamar and Aline Remus. With precision feeding, I know you work quite a bit with them, but we have focused on grow finish basically till now. So it's interesting. You've been working more on the sow side of it and precision feeding with sows. So just give you the opportunity to kind of discuss what you've been working on and what you've been finding.
Okay. So at the very beginning, we decided I began to work on precision feeding for sows because it was a question that the producer had. So we had to move from individual individual sows in gestation to group gestation. So moving from there to the group gestation, what is the feeding system that we should use? And we have the possibility to do precision feeding sometimes on having 2 compartments. Does it have an advantage? So knowing that you have to buy new systems, so there was question on the field. So we decided to do the first project that was divided into. So the first part of the project was to do simulation. So we used a database where we estimate with the in-rapport model the nutrient requirement of each sow. So having what's really happening at that time. And then we, first of all, look at how conventional feeding is going with the nutrient requirement. And what we observed is that conventional feeding, at least in Quebec, is really good for most of the sows. Gills seems to be a little bit restricted at the end of the gestation. So after that, with the model, we estimate like different parameters to like precision feeding per parity, or considering or not individual weight of the sows at breeding. But to a certain point, we will never know the number of piglets that she has during its gestation. So we have to use average or target performance parameters to estimate the nutrient requirement curves. So at the end of the simulation, we consider that the most applicable strategy was to use one lysine requirement curve per parity. So, and the other point to know is that precision feeding is mainly just during the group gestation. So if you have a breeding section, individual crates that last like 30 days of gestation, then you can just start the precision feeding at 30 days of gestation. So after the simulation, we go on a commercial farm where we test it. So we test our precision feeding per parity compared to the conventional feeding. And we followed about 400 sows during 2 cycles of gestation and lactation. And what we observe, first of all, is that we can reduce protein intake without having any negative impact. On multiparous cells, we didn't see any effect on performance, and we really reduced the nitrogen intake. There's something that we saw that was interesting, is that for the gills that we followed during 2 cycles of gestation, so the gills that received the precision feeding during their first parity and continue in their second parity. So in the second parity, what we saw is a significant difference. So in terms of number of piglets that was bigger than 1.2 kilogram at birth. And we saw a tendency to have a better weight gain of the litters. So it seems to have something interesting for the gills. So after this project, we decided, since we have our new research barn just been built like in the last two years, so to start a project, and we are still analyzing the result actually, but we decided to follow up the gills. So we have only gills at the beginning of a new farm, and we have a research farm. So let's go. We go on it, and we test it on around 400 sows at the beginning, and during 3 cycles of gestation and lactation to see the long-term effect on culling, if there was any effect. So to this point, what we observed, again, that time we had precision feeding per parity again, but we had another treatment that was precision feeding individual, considering the weight of sows at the beginning. So, and doing it during the breeding section also. So we had the possibility to do it at the farm. And what we observed to this day, so we analyzed the first and second parity, and we are analyzing the third now and the overall performance of those sows. But for the moment, what we observe is more effect now in gills. So we had more weaned piglet, less mortality in terms of stillborn piglet. So we saw a tendency also in the first project of having a little bit less stillborn piglet. And we saw, again, a reduction in mortality, which leads to a little bit more weaned piglet. So really, we are now, as I said, and the result will be transferred soon. But for them, we expect to maybe that overall what will be really the conclusion. So we are waiting to finish all of that to have the real result at the end now.
That's very interesting. So, I mean, at the beginning, you said that you had originally looked at traditional feeding, which I assume is you feed one diet throughout gestation, and that did a good job. So what is the actual then adjustment that you're making with precision feeding, and where could those benefits then be coming from if traditional feeding was actually, it looked okay?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But we didn't expect, normally precision feeding is really a reduction in the excess of protein that is given. So normally we don't expect to have that much positive impact with precision feeding. It's really a reduction of excess. But it's really the gills that we saw a potential, because it was restricted at the end of the gestation, where there is the big dominant of the big lysine requirement for the piglet. So we know that it's at the end that we have a little push in the nutrient requirement. So it's really there that we saw it could be possible. On the opposite, we didn't expect to have any impact on multiparous sows, and we didn't see it in our recent project on second parity. And first result now for multiparous, for the third parity, didn't seem to be that much. So if there is any positive impact, we expect to be the gills, which we saw something also. There is, however, the conventional feeding is well feeding the majority of sows, but really overfeeding. So sometimes this excess of protein could have also, it have to be metabolized by the animal. So it use energy to metabolize those proteins. So it could have also some effect on sometimes body condition and all of that. So in our project, we saw some things on body condition. So we expect, this is why we want to really look at what will happen after the third parity. Do we have any difference for that? But for for the performance of piglet, we didn't see that much for the moment in terms of there is the mortality, as I said, but for the weight gain to this moment at the second project, we didn't see that much.
Interesting. So for these projects, you've basically been adjusting the protein content of the diet. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Well, I guess one of the things that I've always thought about is, we talk about bump feeding at the end of gestation and how that doesn't really work. And my big thing is that, well, you're just feeding the same diet and you're feeding more of it, but that doesn't mean the sow might not just need more feed, but actually a different composition of the feed, right?
Exactly.
And not just a lowering.
Yeah. So this is what we can do with precision feeding. So having two feed, one that is the high, and like it to the highest level of lysine you need, and the lowest, and you can mix together and be better fit the nutrient requirement. So you can adjust a little bit better. So at the end, even we did a bump feeding. So in terms of energy, all the treatment was like the same and all of that. And we had, however, the bump feeding also, but we also adjust the concentration better than the conventional feeding, who is always a flat line. So we can gain a little bit more. The ratio is moving. Yeah, we work also. We adjust not only the lysine, we adjust also the phosphorus. So we were able to optimize a little bit more also the level that we were giving, and this helped also for the feed costs. So the phosphorus is a nutrient that is a little bit expensive. So we will do also the economic analysis to see what we can gain for that. And if we finish at the conclusion that we have some impact on gills, then we will also add those potential to the economic analysis.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the phosphorus and calcium, and especially because there was the thought that maybe if we have our cells group housed and they're moving around more, that requirement might be greater, right? Because a lot of that the requirement for phosphorus and that was developed in cell or stall cell housed sows, right? So, do you think that you might adjust the model to account for group housing, or or I guess are there plans to look at group versus stall housed?
It's a good question. For the moment, we are actually doing another project on precision feeding, but really focusing on phosphorus. So we start this project, and we are doing like a urinary collection of sounds to see if we go too low or too high. So we'll have some data there to help us to see if we go too far or if it's okay in terms of nutrient requirement, in terms of phosphorus requirement. But now it's running now, the trial. So we start analyzing a little bit with the Laval University, so we're with the Martial et Tourneau and Monnier also on this project. So we'll see. In the project that we have done, we optimized a little bit the phosphorus, but it was really the lysine that was the limiting nutrient. So we really focused on optimizing the lysine requirement, and we adjusted a little bit the phosphorus just to have some gain also, but without just to be too challenging in terms of the phosphorus, since we didn't yet worked on it, but now we are working on it.
Yep. Well, it definitely takes time. You don't want to look at too many things at all at once. But it was one question that we had tried to look at a long time ago at Prairie Swine Center, but our group house cells didn't move around enough to actually so they didn't exercise when they were outside of the crates, or they just stayed in the crates. So it was it's a difficult question to answer, but I think with this new technology, and then the push to go with group housing, I think it's going to become more and more important to look at things like this. I think, and just in general, the precision feeding and looking at maybe more of a phase feeding approach in gestation, I think is going to be important when it comes to sound nutrition. That for a long time has been kind of ignored, probably because it's hard. It takes a long time to do. Like you're looking at years to do your type of work to actually get some results. So I guess with all the work that you're doing, what would be like the final goal? Like, what would you like to see implemented? I guess at the perfect level, or then maybe at the what we would actually be able to achieve.
At this point, I would say that precision feeding per parity would be an easy precision feeding. It's like tomorrow you have a system like this, you can apply this strategy. So it's really, you don't need to wait the sows or anything. So we just a nutrient requirement curve per parity. And when you're doing your nutrient requirement curves, just be sure that you target performance, not using maybe just an average performance, because if you're using an average performance, you might underestimate half of your cells. So just be sure to establish your curve. But when you have the nutrient requirement curve, then it's easy to just put the guilt on those nutrient requirement and exchange, and you will have a gain on feed cost and on excretion also. So now we have to validate if there is other impact on performance that could help to make that more interesting for the pig producer. But that will be at this moment the best we can do. But to a certain point, even we have to validate in gestation might be not the ideal, might not be not far away of that, because you will never know how many piglets there is in the gestation. You don't know what will be the weight gain of those piglets, and it drives a lot the nutrient requirements. So it might be per parity seems to be quite okay to this point. For the lactation precision feeding, so in our we work a little bit more on simulation to see what was the potential. So we didn't have yet done trials. So few other researchers have done those type of project or are doing actually some project on that. But on lactation, actually, again, we can work on with curve per parity, and it could work well also. But eventually, what would be the most interesting is really to have a dynamic way of, knowing what the sows is eating, and to adjust really individually every concentration that we give to each sows every day would be probably the best eventually for the sows. So to a more dynamic way of doing precision feeding for the lactation.
Yeah, I think if anything, one of the benefits would be of just looking at nutrient requirements in the gestating and lactating sow, right, and getting those right. And especially when I think of the issues that we're having with sow mortality and longevity and stuff like that, I might be biased, but I personally think a lot of it has to do with nutrition, and that, we've made all these advances in the sow, but little advances in the nutrition. So I think it'll be interesting to see where this research goes.
And eventually it would be because those models come from data, but we adjust it for parameters, but it would be interesting to have level, like I've done in my master study. So bringing the precision feeding to what the model is saying that is the right requirement, but increasing like 15% more or 30% more, and to see if there is any differences, because it is what is hard with the sows. So there is still so many variability that if you don't have many sows, you may not see anything and you say that it's okay, but maybe if you had more, you would have seen something positive or not. So it's where it's a little bit difficult with the sows, and you need to have a lot of animal. So with our new research barn, here we have a 600 sow barn in batches, 125. So every month we have 125 sows. We are trying to have more research on that and to continue to work on precision feeding. And we will, as I said, we didn't do yet project on precision feeding and lactation, but we plan, of course, to do a follow-up of our simulation to test it in our farm.
What do you see as the potentially biggest obstacle to adopting this at the farm level, right? Is it the knowledge, or is it the equipment, or something else?
For the moment, I would say that there is the equipment, and when you're using like a curve per parity, it's easy to implement now. So for the moment, I would say that it is more the knowledge. So how to implement it. So I've seen, I've talked with many people, and I've seen some studies, and even I did some studies where I had my own challenge. So you have to pay attention when you are doing the precision feeding. So I would say that if you plan to do a test and to validate what is the impact of precision feeding to a conventional, you want to implement it on your farm. The first thing I would say is just pay attention to how you're establishing the parameters to your curve. So, and just be conscious of how you're actually doing with your conventional feeding. So are you feeding like 80% of your animals, or you're feeding the highest level, the highest nutrient requirement animal, or the 80 percentile, or the average? And just keep in mind to have the same strategy in the precision feeding. So if you have, you want to do precision feeding, then don't use an average if you're focusing on an 80 percentile pig. So you have to have the same strategy, and then before starting a project, just put your conventional and your precision feeding curves in a graph and validate that there is, that it's logical. So your precision feeding should be not that far away from your conventional. So if you're too far away, might be something that it's not you have too much merging on your conventional, or your precision feeding is not using the right animal. So normally at one point it should even touch each other. But most of the time precision feeding, of course, is lower, so we can reduce the protein intake. But you have to pay attention of how you're doing your two to be sure it will work. So to don't underestimate too much. So it could happen sometimes. So precision feeding. So when you're doing it with another model than what you're using in your conventional, so you have the effect of model, and then you have the effect of precision feeding. So yeah, it's art. It is that is pretty challenging, I think, that, and sometimes it's not always done correctly, I think.
I mean, that's the thing that we tell people all the time with nutrition, regardless, right? Know what you're feeding, know who you're feeding, and does it actually come out the way you expect, right? And it's amazing how many don't know if what they're doing is actually effective or not, or how close it is. But yeah, I also think it's interesting, you know, on the sow side, we have the equipment available, but the knowledge is lacking. And on the grow finish, we have the knowledge, but the equipment is the, you know, just from an investment standpoint, because you need so much more of the equipment on the grow finish side. But so hopefully we can get the two together and get these both implemented on the farm. So while we're getting close to the end, was there something else you wanted to talk about before we get kind of into the final message? And
no, I just mentioned it. I think it's really important when you want to apply precision feeding, just take the time at the beginning just to validate if you have really a reduction in protein. So it's really important, because if you don't have it, might be something. And so pay attention to how, and don't forget to focus on the right parameters to establish your nutrient requirements. So it's really important. Yeah.
So I take it that's your take-home message, or do you have a take-home message that
it can be that.
Okay. No, I think that's great. Looking forward to seeing more of the results that you come. We'll definitely have to have you on again to discuss things as you find out more.
It's time for our famous 3.
So at this point, we get to the other 3 questions that we ask all of our guests, and I gave you a little bit of warning right before, so hopefully you've thought about it and have some responses. So our first question is, what is your favorite swine-related book or resource?
So as a French Canadian, I would say that it's not a Canadian book, but I would say that the paper from the Journée de la Recherche Porcine is really great for you.
Yeah. Okay. Then this one, we get some interesting responses to this next one. So what is your favorite book or resource outside of agriculture? This can be, you know, a fiction, a nonfiction, you know, something, whatever you want.
I really love all that is historical and the 2 wars. So I have a book on the infography on the war. So it's really an historical book that I love. So yeah, histoire du monde en infographie. Yeah, French again.
I'm sure the French people will look it up. I'm admittedly a bad Canadian. I don't know French, so it's not. Okay, and then our final one is what characteristic you think sets successful swine professionals apart from those that are not necessarily successful or as successful as the best ones?
I would say that a rigor would be very important. I think it's essential for a professional to just take time and be very rigorous for all he's doing. And I would say that curiosity, of course, also brings a better professional for that.
Good for the professionals and for the students that we're bringing through and training too, to be curious, but also have the rigor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think that's so very good. Well, that brings us to the end. So I'll thank you once again for agreeing and coming on and talking about this very interesting topic with precision feeding. I think it's the future of agriculture, and definitely has potential. So thank you once again.
Thank you so much again for the invitation. It was really a pleasure.